Arrogant millionaire CEO challenges humble waitress to dinner. What she orders leaves him speechless. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The November wind cut through downtown Chicago like a blade, rattling the windows of O'Malley's family restaurant as Valerie wiped down the same table for the third time that morning. The breakfast rush had been lighter than usual. Again. She glanced at the half-empty dining room and felt that familiar knot in her stomach tighten. "Val, you're gonna wear a hole in that table," called her Uncle Patrick from behind the grill, his Irish accent still thick after 30 years in America. Steam rose from the bacon as he flipped it with practiced ease. "Just keeping busy," she replied, forcing a smile. At 28, Valerie had spent more of her life in this restaurant than anywhere else. The red vinyl booths were worn smooth by 3 generations of O'Malley customers, and the black and white checkered floor told stories in every scuff mark. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Chen shuffled in, her walker clicking against the threshold. Valerie's face brightened as she grabbed a coffee pot. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen. Your usual spot?" "You know me too well, dear." The elderly woman's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Though I don't know how much longer I'll be able to make it over here." Valerie's hand paused over the coffee cup. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen settled into her favorite booth by the window. "Haven't you heard? That development company's been going door to door, making offers. Mrs. Patterson down the block already signed. Says she couldn't afford not to." The coffee pot felt suddenly heavy in Valerie's hands. Development company. Price development, I think it was called. Young man in an expensive suit came by my place yesterday. Very polite, very persistent." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "He offered me 3 times what my building's worth, Val. 3 times." Valerie set the coffee down with trembling fingers. "And I told him I'd think about it, but honestly, at my age, with my fixed income." She trailed off, staring out the window at the street that had been her home for 40 years. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Valerie excused herself and walked to the back office, where her father's desk sat covered in bills and receipts. She'd been managing the books since her father's heart attack 2 years ago, and the numbers never seemed to add up the way they should. Patrick appeared in the doorway, his apron stained with the morning's work. "Heard what Mrs. Chen said? Dad's going to have another heart attack when he finds out. Your father's tougher than you think. It's you I'm worried about." Patrick studied her face. "Ah, this place means everything to you." Valerie looked around the office, taking in the faded photographs of family gatherings, the framed reviews from local newspapers, the certificate from the city recognizing O'Malley's as a neighborhood institution. "It's not just a restaurant, Uncle Pat. It's, home." "Yeah." Her voice barely above a whisper. The lunch crowd started trickling in around 11:30, and Valerie threw herself into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and chatting with regulars. But her mind kept wandering to Mrs. Chen's words, price development. The name felt like a curse word in her mouth. She was clearing table 6 when the door chimed again, and everything changed. The man who walked in didn't belong. His charcoal grey suit probably cost more than Valerie made in a month, and his shoes clicked against the floor with the confidence of someone who owned everything he walked on. He was tall, mid-30s, with dark hair that looked like it had been styled by someone who charged by the hour. His eyes swept the restaurant with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property. Valerie felt her jaw clench. She didn't need an introduction to know who this was. He chose a booth near the back, sliding in with fluid movement. When Valerie approached with a menu and water glass, he looked up, and she was struck by how intensely blue his eyes were. It was unsettling, like being examined under a microscope. "Welcome to O'Malley's," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "I'm Valerie. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Coffee. Black." His voice was smooth, cultured. "East Coast money," she decided. "And I'll take a look at that menu." She poured his coffee and watched as he scanned the laminated pages. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes when he saw the prices. Everything here cost half what it would at the trendy spots downtown. "The Irish stew is our specialty," she offered, "my grandmother's recipe. I'll have the club sandwich, white bread, no mayo." He closed the menu with a snap. "Dan, Miss O'Malley." Her blood chilled. "Yes? When you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you. About business." Valerie's grip tightened on the coffee pot. "I'll get your order started." She walked back to the kitchen on unsteady legs. Patrick took one look at her face and set down his spatula. "What's wrong?" "He's here. The developer. Price development." Patrick's face darkened. "What's he want?" "To talk business." She handed him the order slip. "And the club sandwich, no mayo, and probably our whole lives." The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Valerie found herself checking on the man's table more often than necessary, each time catching him watching her with those calculating blue eyes. He ate methodically, checking his phone between bites, looking for all the world like he was conducting a business meeting in a boardroom instead of sitting in a neighborhood diner. When she finally brought his check, he pulled out a business card along with a crisp $50 bill. "Keep the change," he said, though his meal had only cost $12. "And please, sit down for a moment. I'm working. It'll just take a minute." His smile was practiced, the kind that probably worked on most people. "I'm Damon Price, Price Development. I think you know why I'm here." Valerie remained standing, arms crossed. Enlighten me." "This is a charming place, really, full of character, history. I can see why it means so much to the community." He gestured around the restaurant like he was admiring artwork. "But I'm sure you're aware of the financial realities facing small businesses in this economy. We're doing fine. Are you?" He tilted his head, and his expression became almost sympathetic. "I've done my research, Miss O'Malley. Rising costs, declining foot traffic, competition from chain restaurants. The numbers don't lie." Heat crept up Valerie's neck. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Price?" "I'm proposing a solution, a generous one." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a confidential tone. "I'm prepared to offer you and your family well above market value for this property. Enough to set you up in a new location with better foot traffic, lower overhead costs. This isn't just about money." "Everything's about money, Miss O'Malley. The question is whether you're going to be realistic about it or wait until circumstances force your hand." His tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I've acquired every other property on this block except yours. You're the last holdout." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Every other property? Mrs. Patterson signed yesterday. The Chens will sign by Friday. They're practical people. The dry cleaner, the barber shop, even old Mr. Kowalski with his shoe repair." He recited the list like a grocery inventory. "You're surrounded, Miss O'Malley. This entire block will be demolished in 6 months to make way for luxury condominiums." Valerie's vision blurred around the edges. The restaurant, her sanctuary, her family's legacy, it was all slipping away while she served coffee and pretended everything was normal. "I need time to think." "Of course." Damon stood, smoothing his suit jacket. "But don't take too long. I'm not the only developer interested in this area, and my offer is significantly more generous than what you'd get from my competitors." He handed her the business card. Their fingers brushed, and she was surprised by how warm his skin was. Somehow, she'd expected him to be cold to the touch. "There's one more thing," he said, pausing at the door. "I'd like to invite you to dinner tomorrow night. Somewhere we can discuss this properly, away from distractions." "I don't think that's appropriate. It's just dinner, Miss O'Malley. A chance for you to see that I'm not the villain in this story. Just a businessman who believes in treating people fairly." That practiced smile again. "Besides, you should see what your neighborhood is going to become. The restaurant I have in mind overlooks the site where we'll be building. Beautiful view." The bell chimed as he left, and Valerie stood frozen in the middle of her family's restaurant, holding a business card that felt like a death warrant. Patrick emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "What did he say?" Valerie looked around the dining room, seeing it suddenly as Damon Price must have seen it. Outdated, shabby, a relic standing in the way of progress. The afternoon light slanted through windows that probably needed replacing, illuminating dust motes that danced above empty tables. He said, "We're surrounded." That evening, Valerie sat at her father's bedside in the small apartment above the restaurant, watching him sleep. At 62, Sean O'Malley looked older than his years. The heart attack had aged him, carved lines around his eyes that spoke of worry and exhaustion. She held Damon Price's business card between her fingers, the embossed lettering catching the lamplight. The card was heavy, expensive. Everything about it screamed success and power. Her father stirred, opening eyes the same green as her own. "Val, what time is it?" "Just after 8. "You were sleeping so soundly, I didn't want to wake you for dinner." He struggled to sit up, and she quickly moved to help him, adjusting his pillows. The medications made him drowsy, but his mind remained sharp. "How was the dinner shift?" Valerie hesitated. She'd been protecting him from the worst of their financial troubles for months, handling the late payments and mounting bills herself. But this was different. This was the end of everything they'd built. "Dad, we need to talk." Something in her tone made him focus completely. "What's wrong?" She told him about Mrs. Chen's news, about Damon Price's visit, about the dinner invitation. With each word, she watched her father's face grow paler. "Every other property?" he asked when she finished. "That's what he said, and I believe him." She showed him the business card. "He's not some small-time flipper, Dad. This is serious money." Sean O'Malley took the card with trembling fingers. "Price Development. I've heard of them. They're the ones who tore down O'Brien's pub last year, put up that glass monstrosity. He wants me to have dinner with him tomorrow night. Says he wants to show me what the neighborhood's going to become." Her father was quiet for a long moment, staring at the card. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Your grandmother would roll over in her grave," he said quietly. "She started this place with nothing but hope and a handful of recipes from the old country, fed half the neighborhood during the Depression." "I know, Dad. Your mother fell in love with this place before she fell in love with me. Said it reminded her of the kitchen in her childhood home." His voice cracked slightly. "We had our first date right here, after closing time. I made her Irish coffee and burned the bacon." Valerie felt her own eyes growing wet. Maybe we should hear what he has to say. His offer might be enough to start over somewhere else. "It's not about the money, sweetheart. It's about legacy, about being part of something bigger than yourself." He handed the card back to her. "But I'm not the one who has to live with this decision. You are." "What would Mom do?" Sean O'Malley smiled sadly. "Your mother would have thrown his coffee in his lap and told him where he could stick his offer, but she always was braver than the rest of us." Later that night, Valerie walked through the empty restaurant, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She touched each table, remembering the families who'd celebrated birthdays here, the couples who'd had their first dates in these booths, the regulars who'd become friends over years of morning coffee and conversation. In the kitchen, she ran her hands over the old gas range where 3 generations of O'Malleys had cooked with love and pride. The scarred prep table where her grandmother had taught her to make soda bread. The ancient coffee machine that still brewed the best cup in the neighborhood. How do you put a price on memory? How do you negotiate with a man who sees only numbers where you see home? She thought about Damon Price's intense blue eyes, the way he'd catalogued their financial struggles like a coroner examining a body. He wasn't evil, she realized. He was just indifferent to anything that couldn't be quantified in a spreadsheet. But maybe that was worse than evil. Evil could be fought, reasoned with, appealed to. Indifference was like trying to argue with the weather. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Reservations confirmed for tomorrow, 7 p.m. Alinea, looking forward to our conversation. D. Price. Valerie stared at the message. Alinea was one of the most expensive restaurants in Chicago, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than most of her customers made in a day. He was sending a message, showing her the world she could never afford to enter. Or maybe he was genuinely trying to impress her, to wine and dine her into submission. Either way, she was going to that dinner, not because she was tempted by his offer, but because she needed to look this man in the eye and understand exactly what she was fighting against. She typed back, "I'll be there." The response came immediately. "I'll send a car. I can find my own way." It's not about what you can do, Miss O'Malley. It's about what you should allow yourself to accept. Valerie stared at the phone for a full minute before typing her response. 7 o'clock. I'll meet you there. She turned off the lights and headed upstairs, but sleep was a long time coming. Outside her window, the city hummed with its restless energy, and somewhere in one of those glass towers, Damon Price was probably reviewing spreadsheets and profit projections, reducing her family's legacy to a line item on a development budget. Tomorrow night, she would sit across from him at an expensive table and try to make him understand that some things couldn't be bought. She had no idea how to do that, but she had to try. The future of everything she loved depended on it. The next morning brought a steady rain that matched Valerie's mood. She went through the motions of opening the restaurant, brewing coffee, and greeting the handful of early customers, but her mind was already at tonight's dinner. Around 10, her best friend Carmen burst through the door, shaking raindrops from her bright red umbrella. Carmen worked as a social worker downtown and had been Valerie's roommate in college before life pulled them in different directions. "Okay, spill," Carmen said, sliding into the counter stool. "Your text last night was very mysterious. Something about dinner with the enemy." Valerie poured her a cup of coffee and quickly filled her in on the situation. Carmen's expression grew increasingly incredulous. "Wait, let me get this straight. The guy who wants to demolish your family restaurant asked you out to dinner and you said yes. It's not a date, it's a business meeting. At Alinea. Honey, that place is romance central. People propose there. Well, the only thing he's going to propose is a check with a lot of zeros on it." Carmen studied her friend's face. "You're nervous." "Of course I'm nervous. The fate of our restaurant depends on this conversation. That's not the kind of nervous I'm talking about." Carmen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You're nervous about him, the man himself." Valerie felt heat creep up her neck. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You described his eyes in very specific detail for someone who's only interested in business." "I was being observant. Know your enemy and all that." "Uh-huh." Carmen wasn't buying it. "What are you wearing? I haven't thought about it." "You're lying. You've been thinking about it since the moment you agreed to go." Carmen glanced around the restaurant, then back at Valerie. "Come on, we're going shopping." "I can't leave. The lunch rush will be handled by your uncle." just like it was before you started micromanaging every detail." Carmen was already pulling on her coat. "You're having dinner with a millionaire developer who's trying to buy your life out from under you. You need armor, and the right dress is the best armor a woman can wear." 2 hours later, Valerie found herself in a downtown boutique that probably cost more to shop in than she made in a week. Carmen held up dress after dress, each more expensive than the last. "I can't afford any of this," Valerie protested. "You can't afford not to look like you belong in his world tonight? Consider it an investment in psychological warfare." They finally settled on a simple black dress that Carmen insisted was sophisticated, but not trying too hard. It hugged Valerie's curves without being obvious about it, and the price tag made her stomach clench. "Trust me," Carmen said, watching Valerie examine herself in the dressing room mirror. "No, when you walk into that restaurant tonight, you want him to see you as an equal, not some small-town waitress he can intimidate." "But I am a small-town waitress." "No, you're a businesswoman who happens to work in the service industry. There's a difference, and it's all about how you carry yourself." Back at the restaurant, Valerie hid the dress bag in her office and tried to focus on the afternoon shift. But every few minutes, she found herself checking the clock, calculating how much time she had left before she had to transform herself into someone who could sit across from Damon Price without flinching. At 5 o'clock, she closed the restaurant early and went upstairs to her apartment. She showered, dried her hair until it fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and applied makeup with more care than she'd taken in months. The black dress fit perfectly, making her look older, more sophisticated than her usual uniform of jeans and aprons. Standing in front of her bedroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in Damon Price's world, someone who could match his expensive suit with her own carefully chosen armor. But underneath the polished exterior, her heart was hammering against her ribs. The cab ride to Alinea took 20 minutes through Chicago's evening traffic. Valerie stared out the window at the city lights, trying to rehearse what she would say, how she would make her case. But every time she tried to organize her thoughts, she found herself remembering the way Damon had looked at her, the intensity in those blue eyes. Carmen was right. This wasn't just about business, at least not entirely. There had been something electric in the air between them, a tension that had nothing to do with real estate development and everything to do with the most basic attraction between a man and a woman. The restaurant was everything she'd expected. Understated elegance, soft lighting, servers who moved like dancers. The maître d' led her to a table by the window, and her breath caught when she saw the view. The entire city spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of lights and life, and directly below, she could see her neighborhood, the blocks where she'd grown up, where O'Malley's sat like a small beacon of warmth in the urban landscape. Beautiful, isn't it? She turned to find Damon Price standing beside the table, and her carefully prepared composure wavered. He'd changed from his business suit into something more casual, but equally expensive. Dark slacks and a midnight blue shirt that made his eyes even more striking. When he smiled, she caught herself staring at his mouth. "Mr. Price." "Damon, please, we're not in a boardroom." He moved to hold her chair, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something subtle and masculine that made her pulse quicken. As he settled across from her, she noticed details she'd missed in the harsh fluorescent light of the restaurant. The slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair was just long enough to curl slightly at the edges, the fact that his hands, while obviously manicured, showed small calluses that suggested he hadn't always lived in boardrooms. "Thank you for coming," he said, signaling the sommelier. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" Valerie looked out the window again, at the neighborhood that was about to disappear forever. I needed to understand what I'm up against. And what have you concluded? Before she could answer, the sommelier appeared with a wine that probably cost more than Valerie's monthly rent. Damon went through the tasting ritual with practiced ease, then nodded his approval. "This is a 2015 Burgundy," he said, as their glasses were filled, "from a vineyard that's been in the same family for 6 generations. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Like my restaurant. Exactly like your restaurant." He raised his glass. "To family legacies." They drank, and Valerie was surprised by the wine's complexity, the way it seemed to change flavor with each sip. Everything in Damon's world was like this, she realized. Layered, sophisticated, expensive. "Tell me about your family," she said suddenly. He seemed surprised by the question. "What would you like to know? Where you came from, how you got into development, whether you've ever had to worry about making payroll or keeping the lights on." For a moment, his polished facade slipped, and she saw something roar underneath. "You want to know if I've ever been poor? Have you?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning his wineglass between his fingers. "My father was a construction worker, union man, honest as the day is long. My mother cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I spent my childhood in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like industrial disinfectant and my father's work boots." Valerie felt something shift inside her chest. "What happened?" "I got smart, got scholarships, got out." His voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the cost of that escape in the spaces between his words. "I promised myself I'd never be poor again, never be powerless again. And now you have all the power. Now I have enough power to protect myself and the people I care about. By destroying what other people care about." The server appeared with their first course, giving Damon time to consider his answer. The food was artistry on a plate, but Valerie found it hard to concentrate on eating when the man across from her was proving to be far more complicated than she'd expected. "I don't destroy things, Valerie. I transform them. That block where your restaurant sits. Right now, it's dying. Half the storefronts are empty. The buildings are falling apart, and the few businesses that remain are barely hanging on. We're hanging on because we're fighting. You're hanging on because you're stubborn. There's a difference." He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. "I can offer you and your neighbors a way out that lets everyone win. Fair market value for properties that would otherwise become worthless. Jobs for local residents in the new development, a community center on the ground floor where people can gather, just like they do at your restaurant." "It's not the same thing." "Why not?" The question hung between them, and Valerie found herself struggling to articulate something she'd always felt rather than thought. "Because you can't manufacture community, you can't design belonging." She gestured toward the window, toward her neighborhood below. "And those people don't come to O'Malley's for the food. They come because it's theirs, because my grandmother welcomed their grandparents, because my father helped their parents, because it's woven into the fabric of their lives. Fabric wears out, Valerie. It gets replaced. Not if you take care of it." They ate in relative silence for a while, the tension crackling between them like electricity. Valerie found herself stealing glances at Damon, trying to reconcile the ruthless businessman with the boy who'd grown up poor and fought his way to the top. "Can I ask you something?" she said, as they waited for the main course. "Of course. Do you ever miss it, the way things were before?" "Before what?" "Before you had enough power to protect yourself, when things were simpler." He considered this, his expression growing thoughtful. "I miss the feeling that the world was full of possibilities. When I was a kid, I used to walk past construction sites and imagine the buildings that would rise there. I saw beauty in the transformation, in the way empty lots became homes and businesses and places where people could build lives. And now I see spreadsheets and profit margins and zoning restrictions. He met her eyes. Now I see obstacles instead of possibilities. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. For a moment, the polished developer disappeared, and she glimpsed the dreamer he'd once been. "What if there was another way?" she asked softly. "Another way to what?" "To transform the neighborhood without destroying what makes it special." He shook his head. "The numbers don't work, Valerie. I've run every scenario. Historic preservation, mixed-use development, gradual gentrification, none of it generates the returns my investors require. What if your investors are wrong? Then I'd be out of business." The main course arrived, and they fell back into careful conversation about the food, the restaurant, the city. But underneath the polite exchanges, Valerie sensed something changing between them. The battle lines they'd drawn were blurring, and she wasn't sure if that made her stronger or more vulnerable. As they finished their meal, Damon leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling blue eyes. "I have a confession to make," he said. Her pulse quickened. "What kind of confession?" "I've eaten at your restaurant before, 3 times actually, over the past month." Valerie stared at him. "I would have remembered you. I sat at the counter, wore different clothes, kept a low profile. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I made my move." "And what did you learn?" "That you're right about the community aspect. People don't just eat there, they belong there. Mrs. Chen treats you like a daughter. The construction workers from the site down the street trust you to remember their orders. That kid who comes in after school, Tommy, you help him with his homework. You were watching me. I was doing my due diligence." But something in his voice suggested it had become more than that. "You're not what I expected, Valerie O'Malley." "What did you expect? Someone easier to dismiss?" The server approached with the dessert menu, but Damon waved him away. "Just coffee, please." "And the check?" As they waited for their coffee, the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and dangerous possibilities. Valerie found herself studying the planes of his face, the way the candlelight played across his features. There was no denying that he was handsome, or that she was attracted to him despite everything logical reason screamed against it. "Valerie," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something. This development is going to happen with or without your cooperation. I've been honest about that from the beginning." Her heart sank. So this was all pointless. The dinner, the conversation. No. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "This was necessary, for both of us. I don't understand. I needed to see you as more than just an obstacle to be removed. And you needed to see me as more than just the enemy. And what do you see now?" He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent warmth shooting up her arm. "I see a woman who's willing to fight for what she believes in, even when the odds are impossible. I see someone who's built something beautiful and real in a world that's increasingly artificial." His voice dropped lower. And I see someone who's making me question things I've never questioned before." The coffee arrived, but neither of them moved to drink it. The restaurant had grown quieter around them, other diners finishing their meals and heading home, but Valerie felt like they existed in a bubble outside of time. "Damon," she said carefully, "what are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to trust me." "To do what?" "To find a way that lets us both win. Your investors." "Let me worry about my investors." His grip on her hand tightened. "Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to explore alternatives, to see if there's a solution we haven't considered. And if there isn't, then I'll make you an offer that's fair, and you'll make a decision that's right for your family." Valerie looked down at their joined hands, trying to process what was happening. Was this just another negotiation tactic? A more sophisticated form of manipulation? Or was she seeing something genuine in those blue eyes, a crack in the armor that revealed the man beneath the businessman? "Why should I trust you?" "Because," he said, lifting their joined hands and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, "you're the first person in years to make me remember who I used to be." The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that it took her breath away. When she looked up, she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before: vulnerability, uncertainty, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "2 weeks," she heard herself saying. 2 weeks. He signaled for the check, and Valerie excused herself to go to the restroom, needing a moment to collect herself. In the mirror, she looked flushed, her eyes bright with an emotion she didn't want to name. This was dangerous territory. Damon Price represented everything that threatened her world, and yet she was drawn to him in ways that defied logic. The worst part was that she suspected the attraction was mutual, which only complicated an already impossible situation. When she returned to the table, he was waiting with her coat. As he helped her into it, his hands lingered on her shoulders, and she felt the warmth of his touch through the fabric. Outside the restaurant, they stood on the sidewalk as the valet brought his car around, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses. "I'll drive you home," he said. "I can take a cab." "I'm sure you can, but I'd like to drive you home." The ride back to her neighborhood was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they drove through the streets, she knew by heart, Valerie was acutely aware of the man beside her. The way his hands moved confidently on the steering wheel, the way he glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. When they pulled up in front of O'Malley's, the restaurant looked small and shabby compared to the elegant world they'd just left, but it also looked like home, solid and real and irreplaceable. "Thank you for dinner," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Valerie, wait." She turned back to find him studying her face in the dim light from the street lamp. "I meant what I said about finding another way. This doesn't have to be a war." "What would you call it instead?" He smiled, and for the first time it looked completely genuine. A negotiation between equals. She was halfway out of the car when he called her name again. "Which, yes. For what it's worth, you were right about the wine. Family legacies are worth preserving." As she watched his car disappear into the night, Valerie touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss on her hand. 2 weeks, 14 days to find a miracle or to lose everything she'd ever cared about. But as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous thing she might lose was her heart. The next morning brought a flood of phone calls. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Valerie O'Malley had been seen having dinner with the developer, the enemy, the man who wanted to tear down their world. She was barely through her first cup of coffee when Mrs. Patterson knocked on the restaurant's front door, her face flushed with indignation. "Is it true?" the elderly woman demanded, as soon as Valerie unlocked the door. "Did you have dinner with that Price man?" "Mrs. Patterson, it's barely 7 in the morning." "Don't you try to change the subject, young lady. Half the neighborhood saw you getting into his fancy car last night." Mrs. Patterson's voice shook with emotion. "We trusted you, Valerie. We thought you were on our side." More neighbors began gathering outside the restaurant, their faces a mixture of hurt and anger. Valerie recognized Mr. Kowalski from the shoe repair shop, the Hernandez family from the corner market, and at least a dozen others whose lives would be upended by Damon's development plans. "Please," Valerie said, stepping outside, "let me explain." "Explain what?" called out Tony Hernandez. "How you sold us out for a fancy dinner." "I didn't sell anyone out. I was trying to buy us time." "Time for what?" Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked. Time for him to sweet-talk you into giving up without a fight." He's given me 2 weeks to find an alternative. An alternative to what? Taking his money and running. Mr. Kowalski shook his head in disgust. Your grandmother would be ashamed. The words hit Valerie like a physical blow. She looked around at the faces of people she'd known her entire life. People who'd celebrated her birthdays and mourned her mother's death, and saw only disappointment and betrayal. I'm trying to save our neighborhood, she said desperately, all of our businesses, not just mine, by cozying up to the man who wants to destroy them. Mrs. Patterson turned to address the growing crowd. I told you she was too young to handle this, too naive to understand what we're really up against. The crowd murmured agreement, and Valerie felt something crumble inside her chest. These people were her family, her community, and now they were looking at her like she was a traitor. Give me a chance, she pleaded. 2 weeks to prove that I'm fighting for all of us. 2 weeks to what? Fall in love with our enemy? The question came from Carmen, who pushed through the crowd with fire in her eyes. Jesus, Val, what were you thinking? I was thinking about saving the restaurant by flirting with the man who wants to tear it down. I wasn't flirting. Really, because that's not what it looked like from the photos. Carmen held up her phone, and Valerie's blood turned to ice. There on the screen was a crystal-clear image of her and Damon outside a linear, his hands on her shoulders, as he helped her with her coat. The angle made it look intimate, romantic, like a couple at the end of a perfect date. Where did you get this? It's all over social media. Someone tagged it, local business owner gets cozy with developer. Carmen's voice was bitter with disappointment. The comments are brutal, Val. People are calling you a sellout, a gold digger, worse. Valerie stared at the photo, remembering the moment it captured, the warmth of Damon's touch, the flutter in her stomach when he'd looked at her with those intense blue eyes. But stripped of context, frozen in digital amber, it looked like exactly what the crowd was accusing her of. It's not what it looks like, she said weakly. Then what is it? Mr. Kowalski stepped forward, his weathered face creased with pain. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already chosen sides. One by one, the neighbors began to disperse, their shoulders slumped with defeat. Mrs. Patterson was the last to leave, and her parting words cut the deepest. Your mother fought for this neighborhood when the city wanted to put a highway through it. She organized protests, went to city council meetings, never gave up. I thought you had her courage. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. I was wrong. As the crowd melted away, Valerie found herself alone on the sidewalk with Carmen, who was studying her with a mixture of concern and frustration. Talk to me, Val. What really happened last night? Valerie slumped against the restaurant's doorframe. I don't know. Everything I thought I knew about him, about the situation. It's all more complicated than I expected. Complicated how? He's not the monster I wanted him to be. He grew up poor, Carmen. His parents were working class, just like mine. He knows what it's like to struggle. So do a lot of people who don't grow up to destroy neighborhoods. But what if he's right? What if this development is inevitable, and fighting it just means we all lose everything instead of getting fair compensation? Carmen sat down on the curb and patted the spot beside her. After a moment, Valerie joined her, both women staring at the street where they'd grown up playing. You're scared, Carmen said quietly. Terrified. Of losing the restaurant? Of making the wrong choice? Of letting everyone down? Valerie trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Of falling for him. Valerie closed her eyes. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you as well as I do. Carmen bumped her shoulder gently. Val, there's nothing wrong with being attracted to someone, even someone who's theoretically your enemy. There's everything wrong with it. These people trusted me to fight for them, and instead I'm getting butterflies over the man who wants to tear down their lives. Maybe that's exactly why you need to be involved in this. Maybe you're the only one who can bridge the gap between what he wants and what the neighborhood needs. Or maybe I'm just a naive waitress who's in way over her head. They sat in silence for a while, watching the morning sun paint the old buildings with golden light. This was the Chicago that tourists never saw, the real neighborhoods where real people lived and worked and raised families. It wasn't glamorous or sophisticated, but it was authentic in a way that Damon's glass towers could never be. "What are you going to do?" Carmen asked finally. "I don't know. I promised him 2 weeks, but after this morning, I'm not sure the neighborhood will give me 2 days. Then you better figure out pretty quickly whether you're fighting for them or for him. What if I'm fighting for both?" Carmen looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Honey, in my experience, you can't serve 2 masters. Eventually, you have to choose." The rest of the day passed in a blur of hostile glances and whispered conversations. Customers who had been coming to O'Malley's for years suddenly found reasons to eat elsewhere. The lunch rush was more like a lunch trickle, and by evening, Valerie was seriously wondering if the neighborhood's boycott would accomplish what Damon's development plans couldn't, closing the restaurant before he ever got the chance to buy it. She was wiping down tables in the empty dining room when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the photos. "Hope you're okay. Can we talk?" Valerie stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Not a good time." "I understand, but Valerie, what happened between us last night was real. Don't let them convince you otherwise." She deleted the message without responding, but his words echoed in her mind for the rest of the evening. What had happened between them? A business dinner that had turned into something more intimate, more personal than either of them had intended. But was it real, or was she just another deal he was trying to close? That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Valerie found herself remembering not the accusations and anger of the morning, but the moment when Damon had kissed her hand. The gentleness of the gesture, the way his eyes had softened when he talked about remembering who he used to be. She was in trouble, the kind of trouble that started in the heart and spread until it infected every rational thought. The kind of trouble that made smart women do stupid things. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the kind of trouble that could save them all. The second day of her neighborhood exile was even worse than the first. Word had spread beyond their small corner of Chicago, and by noon, a local news crew had set up outside the restaurant. The reporter, an ambitious-looking woman in her 30s, cornered Valerie as she tried to sneak out the back door. "Miss O'Malley, Janet Rodriguez, Channel 7. News, can you comment on allegations that you're collaborating with Price Development?" "I'm not collaborating with anyone," Valerie said, trying to push past the camera. "I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone." "Is it true that you had a romantic dinner with Damon Price while his company was actively trying to force you out of business?" "It was a business meeting at one of Chicago's most romantic restaurants. Our sources say you two looked very cozy." Valerie felt her temper flare. "Your sources don't know what they're talking about. So you're denying any personal relationship with Mr. Price?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Valerie looked directly into the camera, knowing that whatever she said next would be broadcast across the city. "Damon Price and I are on opposite sides of a very important issue. Any suggestion that my personal feelings are influencing my business decisions is insulting and false." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Her feelings were influencing her decisions, just not in the way everyone assumed. The reporter pressed harder. "What about the 2-week delay in the development timeline? Our sources at City Hall say Price Development has suddenly requested additional time to review their plans. Is that related to your dinner meeting?" Valerie's heart skipped. I wouldn't know anything about that. Miss O'Malley, the community is saying you've betrayed them. How do you respond to those accusations? I respond by continuing to fight for what's right, regardless of what anyone else thinks. She pushed past the camera crew and escaped into the restaurant, her hands shaking with adrenaline and anger. But underneath the anger was a flutter of something else, hope. If Damon had really requested a delay, if he was serious about finding an alternative, then maybe she hadn't been wrong to trust him. Her phone rang almost immediately. Uncle Patrick's name on the screen. Val, what the hell is going on? I just saw you on the news. It's complicated, Uncle Pat. Complicated how? Either you're selling us out or you're not. I'm trying to buy us time to find another solution. By dating the enemy. I'm not dating anyone. The words came out louder than she'd intended. I had dinner with him once, as a negotiation tactic. That's all. A negotiation tactic that's got the whole neighborhood turning against us. Do you have any idea how this looks? Valerie sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I know how it looks. But what was I supposed to do? Just roll over and let him steamroll us? You were supposed to fight, not flirt. I am fighting. In the only way I know how, by trusting a man whose job is to destroy everything we've built. The question hit home because it was the same one she'd been asking herself. Maybe I don't know anymore. Patrick's voice softened. Val, sweetheart, I know you're trying to do the right thing. But sometimes the right thing is just to say no and mean it. After he hung up, Valerie sat alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the memories and traditions that 3 generations of her family had built. Was she preserving their legacy or destroying it? Was she fighting for her community or betraying them? Her phone buzzed with another text from Damon. We need to talk. Meet me tonight. This time, she responded immediately. Where? Somewhere private. Away from cameras and crowds. He sent her an address on the outskirts of the city, and despite every rational voice in her head screaming warnings, she found herself typing, I'll be there. Because whatever was happening between them, business, personal, or some dangerous combination of both, she needed to understand it before she could figure out how to handle it. The drive took her through parts of Chicago she rarely saw, past abandoned lots and half-finished construction projects that told their own stories of economic boom and bust. The address led her to a small park overlooking the lake, where Damon was waiting by a bench, his expensive suit traded for jeans and a casual jacket that made him look younger, more approachable. Thank you for coming, he said as she approached. I'm not sure why I did. Because you need answers. Same as me? They walked along the lakefront path, the city lights reflecting off the dark water. For a while, neither of them spoke, the silence filled with all the things they weren't saying. I saw the news coverage, he said finally. Then you know I'm now officially persona non grata in my own neighborhood. I'm sorry about that. I never intended for you to become a target. Didn't you? She stopped walking and faced him. You had to know that having dinner with me would cause problems. You're too smart not to have calculated the risks. He was quiet for a moment, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. You're right. I did know. And I asked you anyway. Why? Because I needed to understand what I was really up against, and because... He trailed off, looking out over the water. Because what? Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the first day I walked into your restaurant. The admission hung between them like a bridge they could either cross or burn. Valerie felt her pulse quicken, her carefully constructed defenses wavering. That's not a good enough reason to put my reputation at risk. You're right, it's not. He turned to face her fully. But it's the truth. The truth is that you're a wealthy developer who sees my restaurant as an obstacle to your profit margins. Everything else is just complicated biology. Is that what you really think? I don't know what I think anymore. The frustration in her voice surprised them both. 2 days ago, my life was simple, difficult, but simple. I knew who I was, what I was fighting for, who my enemies were. Now nothing makes sense. Welcome to my world, he said quietly. I haven't been sure of anything since I met you. They resumed walking, the crunch of gravel under their feet, the only sound besides the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. The park was nearly empty, just a few late-evening joggers and dog walkers sharing the path. Tell me about the delay, Valerie said. Be what delay? The reporter said you'd requested additional time to review your development plans. Damon stopped walking. How did she know about that? So it's true. Yes, it's true. I asked my team to spend the next 2 weeks exploring alternative approaches to the development. What kind of alternatives? Historic preservation with modern additions, mixed-use development that incorporates existing businesses, community partnership models. He ran a hand through his hair. Honestly, I'm not sure any of them will work from a financial standpoint, but I promised you 2 weeks, and I meant it. Your investors must be thrilled. My investors don't know yet, and when they find out, they're going to question my judgment and possibly my sanity. Why risk it? He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because you were right about some things being worth more than money, and because I'm tired of being the villain in everyone else's story. They'd reached a small pavilion overlooking the water, and Damon gestured toward a bench. As they sat down, Valerie was acutely aware of his proximity, the way the moonlight caught the planes of his face, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the lake breeze. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. When you were a kid, before you got out, before you became successful, what did you want to be when you grew up? He smiled, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the boy he'd once been. An architect. I used to sketch buildings on every piece of paper I could find. Not just any buildings, beautiful ones. Places where people would want to live and work and gather. What happened to that dream? Reality. Architecture is art, but development is business. Art doesn't pay the bills or provide security for the people you care about. Do you still sketch? Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep. He looked at her curiously. Why do you ask? Because I'm trying to understand how someone who dreamed of creating beautiful buildings ended up tearing down neighborhoods. Maybe because somewhere along the way, I forgot the difference between building something and building wealth. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. This was the man she'd glimpsed at dinner, the one hiding beneath the polished exterior, the one who was making it increasingly difficult to see him as the enemy. You, Damon, she said carefully, what happens at the end of these 2 weeks? I don't know. If we can find a solution that works for everyone, we move forward with that. If we can't, you demolish everything anyway. I honor my commitments to my investors, yes. And us? What happens to us? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and from the way his eyes widened, it had surprised him as much as it did her. Because suddenly, they weren't just talking about the neighborhood anymore. Valerie, he said softly, I don't know what this is between us. I only know that it's the most real thing I've felt in years. It's complicated. The best things usually are. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, strong, and the calluses she'd noticed told stories she wanted to hear. I need you to know something, he said. Whatever happens with the development, whatever decisions get made in the next 2 weeks, they won't be based on this." He gestured between them. "On whatever this is becoming." "How can you be sure?" "Because I care about you too much to use you." The words hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her heart race. This was dangerous territory, the kind that led to broken hearts and betrayed communities and choices she might never be able to undo. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her want to take the risk anyway. "I should go," she said, even as every part of her wanted to stay. "Probably." Neither of them moved. "Valerie," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "I know this is impossible. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are all wrong, but I need you to know that meeting you has changed something in me." "Changed what?" "The way I see the world. The way I see myself." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, just like he had at the restaurant. "You make me want to be the man I used to dream of becoming." The gesture undid her completely. Against all logic, against all the warnings screaming in her head, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was meant to be soft, tentative, a question rather than an answer. But the moment their lips met, something ignited between them. His free hand cupped her face, and she found herself drowning in the taste and scent and overwhelming presence of him. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "This is a really bad idea," she whispered. "Terrible," he agreed, his forehead resting against hers. "It's going to complicate everything. Probably beyond repair. We should stop before this goes any further." "We should," he said, and kissed her again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This time, Valerie let herself fall into the impossible, dangerous, completely ill-advised attraction that had been building between them since the moment he'd walked into her restaurant. This time, she stopped fighting and let herself feel. When they finally pulled apart, the park had grown quiet around them, the city lights painting everything in soft gold and shadow. "What are we doing?" she asked. "I have no idea," he admitted, "but I don't want to stop." 2 weeks, she said, echoing his earlier promise. 2 weeks to figure out if we can save your neighborhood. And us." He smiled, and it was nothing like his practiced business smile. This one was real, vulnerable, and it made her stomach flip. "In 2 weeks to figure out if there's an US worth saving." As he walked her back to her car, Valerie knew she was crossing a line she might never be able to uncross. She was falling for the man who represented everything that threatened her world, and she had no idea how to reconcile that with everything she believed about loyalty and community and fighting for what was right. But as she drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in months, she felt hopeful. Not just about saving the restaurant, but about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the most impossible things were also the most worth fighting for. 2 weeks, 14 days to find a miracle, save a neighborhood, and figure out if love could really conquer all the obstacles standing between them. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to O'Malley's. Valerie was barely through her first cup of coffee when a sleek town car pulled up outside, and a woman in an immaculate Chanel suit stepped out. She was 50-ish, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, and the kind of confidence that came from decades of boardroom victories. "Miss O'Malley." The woman's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Margaret Price. I believe you know my son." Valerie's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "Mrs. Price, this is unexpected. May I come in? I think we need to talk." Against her better judgment, Valerie unlocked the front door and gestured Margaret inside. The older woman surveyed the restaurant with sharp eyes, taking in every detail from the worn vinyl booths to the faded photographs on the walls. "No, charming," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but very authentic. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be lovely." Valerie busied herself with the coffee service, hyper-aware of Margaret's scrutiny. When she returned with 2 cups, she found Damon's mother seated in the booth by the window, her posture perfect despite the cracked vinyl. "You're wondering why I'm here," Margaret said without preamble. The thought had crossed my mind. "My son called an emergency board meeting yesterday. He's requesting a 2-week delay on the Lincoln Park project to explore what he called alternative development strategies." Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. The board was not pleased. Valerie kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "Oh, I think you know quite a lot about it. In fact, I think you're the reason for it." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Miss O'Malley, what exactly do you hope to accomplish with my son?" "I'm trying to save my family's restaurant." "By seducing him?" The accusation hit like a slap. "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it? A beautiful young woman in distress, a wealthy man with a guilty conscience. It's quite the classic story." Margaret's eyes glittered with malice. But let me tell you something about my son. Damon has always been a romantic. He sees rescuing you as a chance to be the hero of his own story, but heroes rarely make good businessmen." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. How refreshingly naive. "Tell me, what do you know about Damon's history with women?" "I don't think that's any of my business." "Oh, but it is. Because you're not the first woman to think she could change him, could make him choose love over profit." Her name was Sarah, and she was a social worker who thought she could save the world one case at a time. Margaret's voice turned conversational, almost casual. They were engaged for 6 months, right up until the moment he had to choose between her ideals and a development deal that would have displaced 300 low-income families. Valerie felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What happened?" "He chose business. He always chooses business, Miss O'Malley, because underneath all that charm and those pretty speeches about finding alternatives, my son is exactly what he appears to be, a man who values profit over people." "You're his mother." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I love my son, and I won't watch him destroy everything he's built for a fantasy." Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. "He's worked too hard to get where he is to throw it all away for someone who could never truly understand his world." "Maybe I understand it better than you think." "Really? Then you understand that Price Development employs over 300 people, that our investments support pension funds and university endowments and small businesses across the Midwest, that if we fail to deliver on our commitments, a lot of people get hurt." Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. "How many people work here, Miss O'Malley?" "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point. You're asking my son to risk the livelihoods of hundreds for the sake of a dozen. In what universe is that the moral choice?" After Margaret left, Valerie sat alone in the empty restaurant, her head spinning. Was she really just another naive woman who thought she could change a powerful man? Was her growing feeling for Damon clouding her judgment about what was best for her community? Her phone buzzed with a text from Damon. "How's your morning going?" She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Your mother stopped by." The response came immediately. "Shit, what did she say?" "Maybe we should talk in person. I'll be right there." "No, not here. People are already suspicious enough." "Then where?" She gave him the address of Lincoln Park, a few blocks away. If they were going to have this conversation, it needed to be somewhere neutral, somewhere she could think clearly without the weight of her family's legacy pressing down on her. 20 minutes later, she found Damon pacing beside the lake, his usually perfect hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw her approaching, his expression was a mixture of relief and apprehension. "What did she tell you?" he asked without preamble. "About Sarah." His face went pale. "Valerie, I can explain. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you have a pattern of making promises to women that you can't keep. Sarah was different. The situation was different. How? How was it different?" She crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you tell her you were going to find an alternative solution? Did you make her believe that you were changing, that she was changing you?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." The admission knocked the wind out of her. She'd been hoping for a denial, for some explanation that would make this all go away. And when it came down to choosing between her and business, "I chose business." He met her eyes, and she saw genuine pain there. "It was the biggest mistake I ever made. But you made it anyway." "I was younger then. More afraid of failure, more desperate to prove myself worthy of my success." He stepped closer, his voice urgent. "But I learned from it, Valerie. That's why I won't make the same mistake again. How can I believe that? How can I trust that this time will be different? Because this time I know what I'm risking. This time I know what really matters." She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to fall into his arms and trust that love could overcome the obstacles between them. But Margaret's words echoed in her mind, along with the faces of her neighbors who already felt betrayed. "Your mother says you employ 300 people, that your failure would hurt a lot of innocent families." "My mother says a lot of things. But is it true?" Damon was quiet for a moment, watching a jogger pass by on the lakefront path. "Yes, it's true, but it's not the whole truth." "What do you mean?" "Those 300 employees, they're not going to lose their jobs if one project gets delayed or modified. Price Development is a solid company with multiple revenue streams." He turned back to her. "My mother was trying to manipulate you, Valerie. She's very good at it." "Why would she do that?" "Because she's terrified that I'm going to repeat my father's mistakes." "What mistakes?" Damon sat down on a nearby bench, and after a moment's hesitation, Valerie joined him. "My father wasn't always a construction worker. He used to own a small contracting business, did well for himself, until he fell in love with a woman who had big dreams and expensive tastes. Your mother. My mother convinced him to take bigger risks, pursue bigger projects. She wanted the kind of life she felt she deserved. The house in the suburbs, the country club membership, the respect that comes with money." His voice grew bitter. "So he overextended himself, took on projects he couldn't handle, borrowed money he couldn't pay back. What happened? He lost everything. The business, the house, his reputation. We ended up in that 2-bedroom apartment I told you about, and my mother never let him forget that it was his weakness, his love for her, that had destroyed our family's future." Valerie felt a stab of sympathy for the boy Damon had been, caught between parents whose love had turned toxic. "Is that why she doesn't want you to get involved with me?" She sees history repeating itself. A successful man, a woman from a different world, the potential for everything to fall apart. He looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "But she's wrong about you, Valerie. You're not asking me to risk everything for your dreams. You're asking me to remember my own." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Uncle Patrick's name on the screen. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "Val, where are you?" "We've got a situation here." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves reporters and protesters, and your father having what looks like the beginning of another heart attack." Valerie shot to her feet. "I'll be right there." She ended the call and turned to Damon, who was already standing. I have to go. There's some kind of crisis at the restaurant. I'll drive you. That's probably not a good idea. Valerie, if your father's having health problems, you shouldn't be driving upset. She wanted to argue, but the concern in his voice was genuine, and the thought of her father having another heart attack made her hands shake. Okay, but you stay in the car. The drive back to O'Malley's took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As they turned onto her street, Valerie gasped. At least 50 people were gathered outside the restaurant, some holding signs that read, "Save our neighborhood" and "No more corporate greed." News vans lined the block, and reporters were interviewing anyone willing to talk. "Jesus," Damon muttered, "this is bigger than I expected." "Drop me off at the corner," Valerie said. "I don't want anyone to see you." "Valerie, please. This is complicated enough already." He pulled over, and she started to get out, then turned back. "Damon, what you said about not making the same mistake twice. Yeah, I hope you mean it, because if you break my heart the way you broke Sarah's, I'll never forgive you." She was out of the car before he could respond, pushing through the crowd toward the restaurant. People called her name, some supportive, others accusatory, but she ignored them all. Her only focus was getting to her father. She found him in the back office, slumped in his chair with Patrick hovering anxiously nearby. His color was better than she'd expected, but he looked exhausted and older than his years. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine, just got a little overwhelmed by all the commotion." He gestured toward the window, where they could see the crowd through the gaps in the blinds. "Mrs. Chen organized this. Apparently, word got out that price development is pressuring other businesses in the area, and people are scared." "What do you mean, pressuring other businesses?" Patrick handed her a copy of the Chicago Tribune. The headline read, "Development company uses aggressive tactics to force out local businesses." Valerie scanned the article, her heart sinking with every paragraph. It detailed a pattern of behavior by price development, buying up properties around their targets, raising rents on month-to-month leases, using zoning challenges to create problems for business owners. The article painted a picture of a company that didn't just buy properties, but systematically dismantled communities. "This can't be right," she said. But even as she spoke, she remembered Damon's casual mention that he'd already acquired every other property on the block. "And it gets worse," Patrick said grimly. "Look at the sidebar." The smaller article was titled, "Local Business Owner's Romantic Relationship with Developer Raises Questions." It included quotes from several neighbors questioning Valerie's motives and commitment to the community. "They're making it sound like I'm some kind of corporate spy," she said weakly. "Are you?" The question came from her father, and the pain in his voice was worse than any accusation from strangers. "Dad, no, of course not." "Then what's this about, Val?" "Because I'm looking at photos of you with this man, and I'm reading about secret meetings and romantic dinners, and I don't understand what's happening to my daughter." Before she could answer, there was a commotion outside. Through the window, they could see the crowd parting as someone pushed through. Valerie's blood turned to ice when she recognized the figure at the center of the disturbance. Damon had gotten out of his car. "Oh no," she breathed. He was trying to reach the restaurant's front door, but the crowd was having none of it. Someone threw a cup of coffee that splashed across his shirt. Another person shouted accusations that were loud enough to hear through the glass. "What the hell is he doing?" Patrick demanded. "Being an idiot," Valerie said, already moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To stop this before someone gets hurt." She pushed through the crowd, positioning herself between Damon and the angry protesters. Up close, she could see that his jaw was set with determination, but there was something else in his eyes, a vulnerability that reminded her of the man who talked about sketching buildings as a child. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I needed to see this for myself, he said, gesturing at the crowd. And I needed to understand what I was really up against. Well, now you know. These people aren't just obstacles to your development plans. They're human beings whose lives you're trying to tear apart. Miss O'Malley, one of the reporters had spotted her. Can you comment on your relationship with Mr. Price? There is no relationship, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Damon flinched as if she'd slapped him. Valerie, Mr. Price and I had one business dinner to discuss his development plans. Any suggestion of a personal relationship is completely false. The denial felt like acid in her throat, but it was necessary. She could see the faces in the crowd, the people who'd trusted her, and she knew that protecting whatever was growing between her and Damon wasn't worth losing their faith entirely. So you're rejecting his offer, called out Mrs. Chen. And I'm fighting his offer with everything I have. What about the 2-week delay? This from Janet Rodriguez, the Channel 7 reporter. Our sources say Mr. Price requested additional time specifically to accommodate your concerns. Valerie glanced at Damon, seeing the trap they'd walked into. Anything she said now would either betray him or confirm the crowd's suspicions about their relationship. Mr. Price's business decisions are his own, she said carefully. My only concern is protecting our neighborhood and our way of life. Mr. Price, called another reporter, do you have any comment on allegations that your company uses intimidation tactics against small business owners? Damon stepped forward, and Valerie tensed. This was his chance to defend himself, to set the record straight about his company's practices. But when he spoke, his words surprised everyone. Those allegations are accurate, he said quietly. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Valerie stared at him in shock. I'm sorry, the reporter looked confused. The allegations about my company's tactics are accurate. We do use aggressive strategies to acquire properties for development. We do make life difficult for business owners who refuse to sell. His voice grew stronger, more confident. And I'm here today to announce that those practices end now. The crowd erupted in surprised voices and shouted questions. Valerie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Furthermore, Damon continued, raising his voice to be heard over the noise, I'm announcing that Price Development is suspending all acquisition activities in this neighborhood pending a comprehensive review of our development plans. For how long? Someone shouted. For as long as it takes to find a solution that truly serves this community's interests. Janet Rodriguez pushed closer with her microphone. Mr. Price, what prompted this sudden change of heart? Damon looked directly at Valerie, and she saw everything in his eyes. The choice he was making, the risk he was taking, the bridge he was burning for her sake. I was reminded that building communities is more important than building wealth, he said, and sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars. The crowd began to disperse, people buzzing with excitement and confusion. Some looked skeptical, others hopeful, but the immediate crisis seemed to have passed. As the reporters packed up their equipment and the protesters drifted away, Valerie found herself alone on the sidewalk with Damon. Why did you do that? She asked. Because it was the right thing to do. It's going to cost you everything. Maybe it's going to save everything that matters. She wanted to throw her arms around him, to tell him that she was proud of his courage and grateful for his sacrifice. But too many people were still watching, still looking for evidence that their relationship was more than professional. You should go, she said instead. Valerie, please, just go. He nodded, understanding the impossible position they were both in. But as he turned to leave, he said quietly, This doesn't change how I feel about you. I know, she whispered back, but it changes everything else. That evening, Valerie sat in her apartment above the restaurant, staring at her phone. She'd been holding it for 20 minutes, trying to decide whether to call Damon. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained and more confused than ever. His public announcement had been broadcast on every local news station. The headlines were already shifting from developer versus community to millionaire's change of heart. Some reporters were calling it a publicity stunt, others a genuine transformation. But Valerie had seen his face when he'd made the announcement, and she knew it was real. The question was, what did it mean for them? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Carmen standing in the hallway with a bottle of wine and a grim expression. "We need to talk," Carmen said, pushing past her into the apartment. "If this is about today, it's about a lot more than today." Carmen set the wine on the kitchen counter and turned to face her. "Val, I've been doing some research on your boyfriend." "He's not my boyfriend." "Whatever. I've been researching Damon Price, and what I found isn't good." Carmen pulled out her laptop and opened it on the kitchen table. The screen showed a series of news articles dating back several years, all featuring Damon or his company. "Look at this," Carmen said, pointing to a headline from 2 years ago. "Price Development displaces 200 families for luxury high-rise." Valerie's stomach clenched as she read the article. It described a low-income housing complex that had been demolished to make way for condominiums starting at $3 million. The previous tenants had been given minimal relocation assistance and forced to move to neighborhoods with higher crime rates and fewer services. "And this one," Carmen continued, pulling up another article. "Elderly woman dies after forced eviction." The story detailed an 80-year-old woman who'd had a heart attack during the stress of being evicted from her apartment of 30 years. Her family blamed Price Development's aggressive tactics for her death. "Carmen, I don't want to see any more." "But you need to see them. You need to understand who you're falling for." Carmen's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't just about your restaurant, Val. This man has destroyed dozens of communities. He's displaced hundreds of families. He's exactly the kind of person your mother spent her life fighting against." Valerie sank into a chair, the weight of the evidence crushing her chest. But today, he announced that he was changing his practices. Words are easy, Val. It's actions that count, and his actions have caused real harm to real people. Maybe he's learned from his mistakes, or maybe he's just learned to be more sophisticated in his manipulation. Carmen sat across from her, taking her hands. "Honey, I know you think you're seeing something special in him, some hidden goodness that no one else recognizes. But that's what every woman thinks when she falls for the wrong man. You don't understand. When we're together, he's different. He's vulnerable and honest and probably very good at making you feel like you're the only woman who's ever understood him." Carmen's voice was sad but determined. "Val, I've seen this pattern 100 times in my work. Powerful men who can charm anyone, who make every woman feel like she's special, like she's the one who can change them. This is different. Is it? Because from the outside, it looks exactly the same." After Carmen left, Valerie spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through everything she'd learned. The articles painted a picture of a man who was ruthless in his pursuit of profit, who saw communities as obstacles to be removed rather than preserved. But that man seemed so different from the one who'd kissed her by the lake, who'd talked about remembering his dreams. Which version was real? The successful developer who'd built his empire on the displacement of the poor, or the vulnerable man who claimed she was changing him? Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Damon, can't sleep. Thinking about you." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "We need to talk tomorrow." "Everything okay?" "I don't know. We'll find out." She turned off her phone and tried to sleep, but her dreams were filled with images of demolished buildings and displaced families, all watching her with accusing eyes. The next morning brought another surprise visitor to O'Malley's. Valerie was setting up for the breakfast shift when a young woman in her early 30s walked through the door. She was pretty in an understated way, with brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that suggested non-profit work rather than corporate success. "Are you Valerie O'Malley?" the woman asked. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk." Valerie's blood turned to ice. "Sarah, as in Damon's ex-fiancée?" "Yes." Sarah's smile was sad but not unkind. "I saw the news coverage yesterday. His announcement about changing his practices, the rumors about you two, it felt familiar. I don't think this is appropriate. Maybe not. But I think you deserve to know what you're getting into." Against her better judgment, Valerie poured 2 cups of coffee and led Sarah to a booth in the back. The restaurant was empty except for them, the morning rush still an hour away. "Why are you here?" Valerie asked. "Because I see myself in you. The way you looked at him yesterday when he made that announcement, I remember feeling that way once, like maybe I'd found someone who could be redeemed, who just needed the right woman to bring out his better nature. And you don't think that's possible?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with deliberate care. "I think Damon is capable of great kindness and genuine feeling. I think he can be charming and romantic and absolutely sincere when he tells you that you're changing him. But I also think he's fundamentally shaped by fear of being poor again, fear of being powerless, fear of being seen as weak. And when push comes to shove, that fear will always win. What happened between you two?" Exactly what his mother probably told you. He was asked to choose between a lucrative development deal and doing what he knew was right. 300 families were going to lose their homes, but the profit margins were too good to pass up. And he chose the money. He chose security, his company's security, his investors' security. Sarah met her eyes. Everyone's security except the people who actually needed protecting. "Did you love him?" "Completely. And I think he loved me too, in his way. But love wasn't enough to overcome his fundamental nature. What if he's changed? What if losing you taught him something?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Valerie, do you know what Damon did after we broke up?" "No." He immediately started work on an even bigger project, a luxury resort that displaced an entire fishing village in North Carolina. 60 families who'd lived there for generations, gone so that rich people could have a scenic place to vacation. The words hit Valerie like physical blows. "When was this?" "Last year. If losing me had really changed him, do you think he would have done that?" Valerie felt sick. Every instinct she'd developed about reading people, every moment of connection she'd felt with Damon, suddenly seemed naive and foolish. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't want you to waste 3 years of your life like I did, believing in a fantasy." Sarah reached across the table and touched her hand. "And because those families in North Carolina deserve to have their story told. They're not just collateral damage in Damon's redemption arc. They're real people who lost everything." After Sarah left, Valerie sat alone in the empty restaurant, her world tilting on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about Damon, every tender moment they'd shared, every promise he'd made, it all felt tainted now by the weight of his actions. Her phone buzzed with a text from him, "Meeting at 2 p.m. with my development team to discuss alternative plans. Wish me luck." She stared at the message, torn between hope and despair. Was this another manipulation? Another way of making her feel special while he quietly continued his destructive practices? Or was he genuinely trying to change? She thought about the fishing village in North Carolina, about the families who'd lost their homes while she was feeling sorry for herself about a restaurant. She thought about Margaret Price's warnings and Sarah's bitter experience and Carmen's research. And she thought about the way Damon had kissed her, the vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about his dreams, the courage it had taken for him to make yesterday's announcement. Which version of him was real? Her phone rang, Damon's name on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers to O'Malley's, neighbors who wanted to show their support and discuss the latest developments. The mood was cautiously optimistic, with many people expressing hope that Damon's announcement meant their community was safe. But Valerie couldn't share their optimism. Every smile, every expression of gratitude felt like a weight on her shoulders. These people were trusting her judgment, and she was no longer sure she could trust herself. Around 3 o'clock, her phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Miss O'Malley, this is James Peterson from the Chicago Sun-Times. I'm working on a follow-up story about Price development, and I was hoping to get your perspective on Mr. Price's announcement yesterday." "I don't have any comment." "I understand you've had personal interactions with Mr. Price. Can you speak to his sincerity about changing his company's practices?" "I really can't discuss that." "What about his track record? Are you aware of the Sunset Harbor project in North Carolina?" Valerie's grip tightened on the phone. "What about it? 60 families displaced, a community that had existed for 4 generations, wiped out for a luxury resort. The project was completed last year, well after Mr. Price's breakup with Sarah Mitchell. If that experience had really changed him, I have to go." She hung up, but the reporter's words echoed in her mind. The North Carolina project had been completed last year, after Sarah, after the lesson that was supposed to have changed him. Her phone buzzed with another text from Damon. "Meeting went well. Found some promising alternatives. Can we talk tonight?" This time, she typed back, "We need to talk about North Carolina." The response took several minutes. "Who told you about that? Does it matter?" "It matters to me, because I want you to hear my side of the story. Your side of the story about displacing 60 families. Yes, meet me tonight. Please." She stared at the phone, knowing that this conversation would either save whatever was between them or destroy it completely. "And to Millennium Park, 8 o'clock. Thank you." Millennium Park at night was a different world from the bustling tourist destination it became during the day. Valerie found Damon sitting on a bench near the Crown Fountain, his head in his hands, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. "Thank you for coming," he said as she approached. "I almost didn't. I know." He looked up at her, and she was shocked by the exhaustion in his face. "And you want to know about Sunset Harbor? I want to know if everything I've been feeling for you is based on a lie." He was quiet for a long moment, watching families walk past with young children who squealed with delight at the fountain's changing lights. "Sunset Harbor was the worst thing I've ever done," he said finally. 60 families lost their homes, and I was the one who made it happen. After Sarah, after you were supposed to have learned from your mistakes, after Sarah, I was angry and hurt and determined to prove that I didn't need anyone's approval to be successful. So I took on the biggest, most profitable project I could find, and I didn't let myself think about the human cost. How can you live with yourself? Barely. His voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. Do you want to know what changed me, Valerie? What really changed me? What? 3 months ago, I got a letter from a woman named Maria Santos. Her family had lived in Sunset Harbor for 4 generations. Her grandfather had built their house with his own hands. Damon pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. An elderly Hispanic woman standing in front of a modest but well-maintained home. She didn't write to curse me or threaten me. She wrote to tell me about her grandson. What about him? His name was Diego. 8 years old, loved to fish with his great-grandfather in the mornings before school. The displacement and relocation were traumatic for him, and he started having anxiety attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate in school. Damon's voice cracked. He committed suicide, Valerie. An 8-year-old boy killed himself because I took away the only home he'd ever known. The words hit her like a physical blow. She sat down heavily on the bench beside him, not trusting her legs to hold her up. Maria's letter wasn't angry. It was sad and bewildered and heartbroken. She just wanted me to know that Diego existed, that he mattered, that his life had value beyond my profit margins. Tears were running down Damon's cheeks now. She wanted me to understand that my decisions have consequences that I'll never have to live with. Oh my God. That's when I realized that I'd become exactly the kind of person I used to hate. The kind who sees poor people as disposable, who prioritizes wealth over humanity. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I've been carrying Diego's picture with me ever since. His grandmother sent it with the letter. Valerie felt her own eyes filling with tears. The pain in Damon's voice was genuine, devastating, and it made everything so much more complicated than she'd wanted it to be. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. Nothing can excuse it. But it's why I meant what I said yesterday, why I'm serious about changing my practices. He turned to face her fully. I can't bring Diego back. I can't undo the harm I've caused. But I can try to make sure it never happens again. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation, another way of making me feel sorry for you? Because I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your sympathy. I'm telling you the truth about who I've been so you can make an informed decision about who I'm trying to become. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Around them, the city hummed with its usual energy, but Valerie felt like they existed in a bubble of shared pain and impossible choices. The alternatives you're exploring, she said finally, are they real? They're real. Historic preservation with modern efficiency upgrades, community land trusts that give residents ownership stakes, mixed-use development that prioritizes affordable housing. He met her eyes. They're also significantly less profitable than my original plans. Can you live with that? I have to learn to, because I can't live with another Diego Santos on my conscience. Your investors won't be happy. My investors can find other opportunities. There are plenty of developers who'll give them the returns they want. His voice grew stronger, more determined. But I'm done being one of them. And if it means losing your company, then I'll start over. Build something smaller, something better, something I can be proud of. Valerie studied his face in the lamplight, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation, but all she saw was exhaustion, remorse, and a desperate hope that she might still believe in him. Damon, she said carefully, if we do this, if we try to find a way forward together, I need you to understand something. Anything. I can't be your redemption. I can't be the good woman who saves you from yourself. You have to do that work on your own, I know. And if you ever prioritize profit over people again, we're done. No second chances, no explanations, no forgiveness. I understand. Do you? Because I've seen what happens when developers promise one thing and deliver another. I've talked to the families you've displaced. Damon, I know the real cost of your success. He nodded, and she could see the weight of that knowledge in his eyes. What can I do to prove to you that I'm serious about changing? Start with my neighborhood. Make good on your promise to find an alternative that serves the community instead of displacing it. And then we'll see, one day at a time, one decision at a time. That's all I can ask for. She stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing. I want to meet her. Who? Maria Santos, if you're serious about making amends, she deserves to know that her letter made a difference. Damon's eyes widened. Valerie, I think it's exactly what you need to do. Face the people you've hurt and show them that you're trying to be better. What if she won't see me? Then you'll have learned something important about the consequences of your actions. As she walked away, Valerie felt the weight of the choice she was making. Giving Damon a chance meant risking her heart, her community's trust, and her own principles. But walking away meant abandoning the possibility that people could change, that love could inspire redemption, that even the worst mistakes could be atoned for. She thought about Diego Santos, about Maria's grief, about all the families whose lives had been shattered by Damon's pursuit of success. She thought about her own community, trusting her to protect them from the same fate. And she thought about the man who'd cried real tears over a child he'd never met, who was willing to risk everything he'd built for the chance to build something better. 2 weeks. That's what they'd agreed on. 2 weeks to see if miracles were possible, if love could overcome the past, if people really could change. It should have felt like an eternity. Instead, it felt like barely enough time to find out what they were both made of. The following week brought a whirlwind of activity that left Valerie feeling like she was living in the eye of a hurricane. Damon had been true to his word about exploring alternatives, bringing in urban planners, historic preservation specialists, and community development experts to assess the neighborhood. But every positive development seemed to be met with new challenges. The first blow came Tuesday morning, when Valerie arrived at the restaurant to find a cease and desist order taped to the front door. Price Development's legal team, apparently acting without Damon's knowledge, was claiming that recent plumbing repairs violated the terms of their lease agreement. "They're trying to force us out through technicalities," Uncle Patrick said grimly as they read through the legal documents. Even if Damon's sincere about changing his approach, his lawyers are still playing hardball. Valerie called Damon immediately, her anger overriding any concern about appearing too dependent on him. "I'll handle this," he said the moment she explained the situation. "My legal team acted without authorization. The order will be withdrawn by noon." "How do I know you didn't order this yourself? Maybe this is just good cop, bad cop. Because I'm looking at my calendar, and I have a meeting with Maria Santos in 2 hours. Do you really think I'd be sabotaging our relationship while I'm preparing to face the grandmother of a child who died because of my decisions?" The raw pain in his voice convinced her, and sure enough, the legal order was withdrawn before lunch. But the incident left her shaken. Even if Damon was genuinely trying to change, he was still the head of a company with its own momentum, its own interests, its own ways of doing business. Wednesday brought news that 3 of Damon's major investors had called an emergency meeting to discuss his erratic behavior and abandonment of fiduciary duty. Margaret Price, it turned out, had been busy making phone calls and sharing her concerns about her son's judgment. "They're talking about a vote of no confidence," Carmen reported after doing some investigative work through her non-profit contacts. Apparently, Damon's announcement has spooked a lot of people with money invested in Price Development. What does that mean? It means he could lose control of his own company. And if that happens, whoever takes over won't feel bound by any promises he's made about your neighborhood. That evening, Valerie found herself pacing her apartment, trying to decide whether to call Damon or give him space to handle his business crisis. The decision was made for her when he appeared at her door at nearly midnight, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past few days. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," he said. "I know we agreed to keep our distance while I worked on the development alternatives, but I needed to see you. Come in. You look terrible." He collapsed onto her small sofa, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "The board meeting is tomorrow. They're going to try to remove me as CEO. Can they do that?" If they can prove I'm acting against the company's interests, yes. And my mother has been very helpful in building their case. Valerie sat beside him, fighting the urge to reach for his hand. What will you do? Fight. Present my alternative development plans and hope I can convince them that community-conscious development can be profitable too. He looked at her with exhausted eyes. But honestly, the numbers don't look good. The preservation and community ownership models I've been exploring would reduce our profit margins by 60%. Maybe profit isn't everything. Try telling that to a room full of investors who've put their retirement funds into my projects. So you're saying it's impossible, that there's no way to develop the neighborhood without destroying it? I'm saying it's complicated. More complicated than I wanted it to be. Valerie felt something cold settle in her stomach. Damon, are you backing down? No, I'm being realistic about the challenges we face. We, you and me, this community, the future we're trying to build together. What future? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're preparing to tell me that your promises were nice in theory, but impossible in practice. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I'm saying that I might lose everything. My company, my reputation, my financial security. Everything I've spent 15 years building. For me, for the chance to be someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Valerie studied his face, looking for any sign that this was another manipulation, another way of making her feel guilty for his choices. What happened with Maria Santos? She agreed to see me. We're meeting tomorrow, after the board meeting. Are you nervous? Terrified. I've never had to look someone in the eye and apologize for destroying their family, but you're going to do it anyway. I have to, whether you and I have a future together or not. I owe her that much. Valerie reached for his hand, unable to maintain her emotional distance any longer. Damon, what if the board votes you out? What if you lose the company? Then I'll start over. Build something smaller, something better. Something that honors Diego's memory instead of adding to the list of people I've hurt. And if that means being poor again, then I'll be poor. I survived it before. I can survive it again. What about your mother, your family's expectations? My mother will survive. She's tougher than she pretends to be. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The only expectations that matter to me now are my own. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, Chicago hummed with its restless energy, but inside Valerie's small apartment, the world felt peaceful and contained. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Anything. If you could go back and do things differently, the whole trajectory of your career, not just the recent mistakes, would you? He considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I was proud of what I'd built, convinced that the ends justified the means. And now I think about all the communities I've destroyed, all the families I've displaced, all the dreams I've crushed in the name of progress. And I wonder if there might have been another way. What would that other way look like? Smaller projects, longer timelines, more community input, less profit, but more pride. He met her eyes. The kind of development that builds communities instead of destroying them. That sounds like something worth fighting for, even if it means starting over from nothing, especially then. Because then you'd be building something that's truly yours, not something you inherited or stole or manipulated your way into. He smiled for the first time all evening. You make it sound almost romantic. Maybe it is. Maybe building something with your own hands, something that serves others instead of just yourself. Maybe that's the most romantic thing of all. Is that what you'd want? A life built from scratch, with no guarantees and no safety net. The question felt like a proposal, though neither of them was ready to acknowledge that yet. I'd want a life built on honesty and integrity. Everything else is just details. The next day brought the news that Valerie had been dreading. Despite Damon's impassioned presentation of alternative development models, the Price Development Board of Directors had voted him out as CEO by a margin of 7-3. Margaret Price, as the largest individual shareholder, would serve as interim CEO while they searched for a permanent replacement. "It's over," Damon told her when he called that afternoon. "They've already instructed the legal team to proceed with acquisition proceedings for the remaining holdout properties. The demolition is scheduled to begin in 6 weeks." Valerie felt the floor drop out from under her. 6 weeks. "I'm sorry, Valerie. I tried everything I could think of. What about the alternatives you developed, the community partnership models? They'll be shelved indefinitely. My replacement will be someone who prioritizes traditional profit margins over community impact." "So we're back where we started, except now I've spent 2 weeks trusting you instead of organizing resistance." "You can still fight this. File injunctions, appeal to the city council, organize protests. With what resources? With what credibility? Half the neighborhood thinks I've been compromised by my relationship with you." "What relationship? We've barely seen each other in the past week. That doesn't matter. The perception is what it is." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Valerie, I know this looks bad. I know it seems like I've failed you. But this isn't over." "Yes, it is. You don't have any power anymore. You can't stop this. Maybe I can't stop it as CEO of Price Development, but I still have resources, still have connections. I'm not walking away from this." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about buying the properties myself, personally, before my former company can acquire them." Valerie's heart skipped. "You can't afford that." "I can if I liquidate my personal assets. My penthouse, my investment portfolio, my art collection, together, they're worth enough to make competitive offers on the remaining properties." "Damon, that's everything you own." "Everything I own that matters to me is standing in a restaurant 6 blocks away, probably wondering if she's made the biggest mistake of her life by trusting me." The words took her breath away. "You're serious. Dead serious. But I need to know something first." "What?" "I need to know if you're with me, really with me, because if I do this, if I risk everything I have on saving your neighborhood, I need to know that you believe in us." Valerie struggled to find words. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll have dinner with me tonight, somewhere we can talk properly. Somewhere I can make you an offer that has nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with our future." "Damon, one dinner. Valerie, one honest conversation about what we both really want. If you decide I'm not worth the risk, I'll respect that, but give me one chance to show you who I want to be." She closed her eyes, knowing that she was about to make a decision that would change everything. Where? Alinea. Where this all started. That seems a little dramatic. Everything about this is dramatic. We might as well embrace it. That evening, as Valerie prepared for what felt like the most important dinner of her life, she found herself remembering her mother. Elena O'Malley had been a fighter, someone who'd never backed down from a challenge or walked away from her principles. But she'd also been a romantic, someone who'd believed in the power of love to transform lives and communities. What would her mother do in this situation? Trust her heart or protect her community? The answer, Valerie realized, was that her mother would find a way to do both. She chose the same black dress she'd worn to their first dinner, but this time she paired it with her grandmother's pearl necklace, a reminder of the generations of strong women who'd shaped her values and her courage. When she arrived at Millionaire, she found Damon waiting at the same table they'd shared 2 weeks earlier, but he looked different, more relaxed, more authentic, like he'd finally stopped trying to impress her and started trying to be himself. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down. "You look tired." "I am tired. Tired of fighting battles I don't believe in. Tired of defending choices I'm ashamed of. Tired of being the villain in everyone else's story. And what do you want to be instead? Someone you can be proud of. Someone who builds things instead of tearing them down. Someone who understands that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold or developed." The sommelier appeared with wine, but Damon waved him away. "Actually, we'd like to order first." "Of course, sir. Have you had a chance to review the menu?" Damon looked at Valerie, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Actually, I think my dinner companion would like to make a special request." The waiter looked confused. "I'm sorry." Valerie understood immediately. This was the moment from the title, the event that had started this whole story. Her chance to make the request that would leave him speechless, that would force him to confront the true cost of his actions. She looked directly at Damon, her voice clear and steady. "I'd like to order the bill for everything your company has destroyed this year." The waiter blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "She's making a statement," Damon said quietly, his eyes never leaving Valerie's face, "about accountability, about the price of progress, about what it really costs when we value profit over people." The waiter looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps I should get the manager." "That won't be necessary," Damon said. "We'll have the tasting menu. And please, give us some privacy." As the waiter hurried away, Damon leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. That was devastating, harsh, over the top. Perfect, absolutely perfect. He reached across the table for her hand. "You just made me realize something." "What?" "That you're not just fighting for your restaurant. You're fighting for the principle that some things are more important than money. That communities matter. That people matter." "I thought you already knew that." "I knew it intellectually, but hearing you say it, seeing the fire in your eyes when you said it, that's when I felt it, really felt it." "And what do you feel?" "That I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the damage I've done, and I want to do it with you." Valerie's heart raced. "Damon, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you. I'm saying that I want to marry you, build a life with you, create something beautiful together. But first, I need to know if you can forgive me for the harm I've caused." "It's not my forgiveness you need. It's Maria Santos's. It's the families from Sunset Harbor. It's all the people whose lives you've disrupted." "You're right, but I'm asking for yours too, because without it, nothing else matters." The first course arrived, but neither of them touched their food. They were too busy staring at each other, both aware that they were standing at a crossroads that would determine the direction of their entire future. "If I forgive you," Valerie said carefully, "what does that look like? What does our life together look like?" "It looks like me liquidating my assets to buy the properties on your block. It looks like us working together to develop a community ownership model that preserves the neighborhood's character while providing economic opportunities for residents. And after that? After that, we build something new. A development company that specializes in community-conscious projects. Affordable housing, historic preservation, mixed-use developments that serve existing residents instead of displacing them. That sounds like a very different kind of business model." "It is. Smaller profits, longer timelines, more complicated stakeholder relationships, everything my old company would have considered inefficient. Can we make it work financially?" "I don't know." But I'd rather risk failure trying to do something meaningful than guarantee success doing something I'm ashamed of. Valerie looked around the elegant restaurant, thinking about the contrast between this rarefied world and the humble surroundings of O'Malley's. What if I said yes? What if I agreed to marry you and build this new life together? Then I'd sell my penthouse tomorrow and use the money to make an offer on Mrs. Chen's building. And if I said no, then I'd still sell my penthouse and make the offer, because I need to do this regardless of what happens between us. I need to prove to myself that I can be the man my father raised me to be, not the man my fear turned me into. The honesty in his voice convinced her more than any passionate declaration could have. This wasn't about winning her back or manipulating her emotions. This was about a man trying to find his way back to his own soul. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "What?" "I love you too. I've been fighting it, because loving you felt like betraying everything I stood for. But I can't fight it anymore." His face transformed with joy and relief. "So what does that mean?" "It means we try. It means we build something together, something that honors both your need for redemption and my commitment to community. It means we figure out how to make love and justice work together instead of against each other. And if we fail, then we fail together, and we learn from our mistakes and try again." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that felt like a promise. "I have something for you." "Damon, if that's a ring..." "It's not a ring. Not yet." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It's a contract." "A contract?" "For the purchase of O'Malley's family restaurant and the building that houses it. I'm buying it from myself, or rather, from Price Development, and transferring ownership to you and your family, free and clear." Valerie stared at the document, hardly believing what she was reading. "How is this possible?" "I still have enough shares in the company to force certain transactions, especially ones that can be framed as asset liquidation. By the time my mother figures out what I've done, the transfer will be complete. This is your family's legacy you're giving away." "No, it's your family's legacy I'm giving back. My family's legacy is what I'm going to build from here on out." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. "What about the rest of the block?" "I'm working on it. Mrs. Chen's building, the barber shop, the dry cleaner. I'm going to try to buy them all and transfer ownership to the families who've been renting. It won't be easy, and I might not be able to save them all, but I'm going to try." "Why? Why risk everything for people you barely know?" "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I can try to prevent more harm from happening. And because..." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Because I want our children to grow up in a world where their father is someone they can be proud of. Our children. Someday, if you'll have me. If you'll trust me to be the kind of man who deserves a family." Valerie looked around the restaurant one more time, then back at the man who just offered to give up everything for the chance to build something better with her. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what?" "Ask me properly. The way a woman deserves to be asked." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He stood up from his chair and dropped to one knee beside the table, pulling a simple diamond ring from his jacket pocket. "Valerie O'Malley," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet restaurant. "Will you marry me? Will you help me build a life worth living? Will you teach me how to be the man I was meant to be?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "To all of it." "Yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as he slipped the ring onto her finger, but Valerie barely heard the other diners, barely saw the smiling faces turned their way. All she could see was the man kneeling before her, offering her not just his love, but his commitment to becoming worthy of it. "I love you," she whispered as he stood and pulled her into his arms. "I love you too," he whispered back. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. 6 months later, Valerie stood in the doorway of the newly renovated O'Malley's Family Restaurant, watching the evening rush with deep satisfaction. The restaurant looked much the same as it always had, the same red vinyl booths, the same checkered floor, the same photographs on the walls. But there were subtle improvements too, more efficient kitchen equipment, better lighting, a small addition that housed a community meeting room where neighbors gathered to discuss local issues and plan neighborhood events. The biggest change wasn't visible to customers. O'Malley's was now owned by the O'Malley Family Trust, which Valerie managed in partnership with her father and uncle. They'd used part of Damon's investment to modernize the restaurant while preserving its character, and the rest to establish a small fund that provided low-interest loans to other neighborhood businesses. "Penny, for your thoughts." She turned to find Damon approaching with 2 cups of coffee, his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened after a long day at their new company. Neighborhood development partners were still small, just the 2 of them, an architect and a community organizer. But they'd already completed 2 successful projects and had 3 more in development. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Good changes." "Mostly. Though I still can't believe your mother agreed to sell us those other properties." She didn't have much choice after the board revolt failed, and the investors realized that community-conscious development actually generates positive publicity. Damon grinned. "Turns out that developer with a conscience is a pretty marketable brand." "And Maria Santos? Any word from her?" Damon's expression grew more serious. "She agreed to meet with me again next month. She's considering letting me fund a scholarship program for kids from her new community. It's not much, but it's a start. It's more than a start. It's accountability. I have a long way to go before I've made amends for what I did. That's why it matters that you're trying." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the familiar rhythm of the dinner shift. Mrs. Chen was at her usual table by the window, sharing a meal with her grandson, who'd just started college. The construction workers from the site down the street were crowded into their regular booth, arguing good-naturedly about the Cubs' chances next season. Tommy, the kid Valerie had been helping with homework, was now in high school and working part-time as a busboy. "Any regrets?" Damon asked. "About what?" "About choosing this life over the easy path. You could have taken my original offer, moved somewhere with better profit margins and fewer complications." Valerie laughed. "You mean the path where I abandon everything I believe in for money? No regrets about avoiding that one." "And the other choice, marrying a formerly ruthless developer with a guilty conscience and a tendency to overthink everything." She turned to face him fully, taking in the man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. His expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and button-down shirts. His perfectly styled hair now showed traces of grey from the stress of starting over. His hands bore new calluses from weekend construction work on their housing projects. He looked nothing like the polished businessman who'd walked into her restaurant 8 months ago. He looked better. "No regrets?" she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Though I reserve the right to complain when you wake up at 3 a.m. to sketch building plans. Deal. And I reserve the right to complain when you refuse to charge enough for the Irish stew because Mrs. Patterson is on a fixed income. Also deal." Uncle Patrick emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Val, we're running low on coffee. Want me to start a new pot?" "I'll handle it," she said, but Damon was already moving toward the kitchen. "I got it. You two, finish up out here." As her husband-to-be disappeared into the kitchen, in their restaurant, in their neighborhood, Valerie felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she'd started fighting to save O'Malley's. It was better. She'd saved her family's restaurant, but more than that, she'd helped save her entire community. She'd fallen in love with her enemy, but more than that, she'd helped him become someone worthy of love. She'd taken enormous risks, but more than that, she'd discovered that the biggest risk of all was not taking any risks at all. "Your mother would be proud," Patrick said quietly, watching her survey their domain. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said that love and justice weren't opposites, they were partners. And look what you've built here. A love story that serves justice, a business that serves community, a life that serves something bigger than yourself. We built it together, all of us. That's what makes it beautiful." As the evening wound down and the last customers headed home, Valerie found herself thinking about the dinner request that had started everything. She'd asked Damon to pay for everything his company had destroyed, never imagining that he'd take the request literally. Never imagining that he'd spend the rest of his life trying to rebuild what he'd torn down. Some bills, she'd learned, couldn't be paid with money. They could only be paid with commitment, with changed behavior, with a lifetime of better choices. And some appetites, for justice, for community, for love that transformed rather than consumed, could never be fully satisfied. They could only be honored day after day, choice after choice, until they became not just desires, but ways of being in the world. Outside, Chicago hummed with its restless energy, full of dreamers and schemers, builders and destroyers, people trying to make their mark on a city that had seen it all before. But inside O'Malley's family restaurant, in the heart of a neighborhood that had refused to surrender, Valerie O'Malley Price was building something that would last. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Not because it was profitable, but because it was priceless. The best things always were. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.